Mr. Stephen Espion, welcome back to the show.
Yeah,
How's it
good.
going?
Yeah, good. Always good.
Always good, always good, always here for a good time.
Yeah, of course. Every time I come back to Malta, I have a great time. I should come back more often for sure.
What's your main reason, actually? Let's start out with that. Why is Malta such a hotspot for you?
I mean, I spent quite a few years here in the early days starting my business. Moved here with my girlfriend at the time, and we made a lot of friends. Went to the conferences, Sigma conferences, went out to some of the events, the crypto events, that kind of thing. And it's good to come back to a place where I'm like recognized, and I'm just sitting having a coffee, and people walk past and they're like, "Oh, Stephen, you're back in Malta." It's kind of cool.
That's
And
unique about Malta.
I like that kind of like the community, the kind of familiarity as well.
So speaking of communities, I heard you're building quite a decent one, from what I understand. So for everyone who doesn't know you, tell us a little bit about the project you're working on and a bit of personal background.
Yeah, sure. I'm the CEO and creative director of Fracture Labs, the developers of Decimated. Decimated is a huge open world survival sandbox, like an RPG, where you can choose to play different factions inside the game. A human citizen, a cyber cop, a wasteland marauder. It's kind of heavily inspired by Mad Max, Cyberpunk, RoboCop, The Running Man, and other types of like 80s and 90s sci-fi movies and games. We've been working. I've been working on this project for 6 years, but then professionally, like seriously, for the last 2.5 years after we raised capital at the end of 2021. Our community is pretty big now. We've got like 70,000 followers on Twitter, around 32,000 members in Discord. We've got tens of thousands of wishlists on Steam and Epic Store. And just today, we're launching an update to the alpha so that people in our community can actually jump in and play the game and give us feedback and help us find bugs for the latest version. And then we're going public in December of this year. So yeah,
That's some awesome news. So I can attest to that because I've been on the wish list for a while, or rather, Decimated has been on my Steam wish list for a while. Still waiting for an alpha key, by the way.
I'll get you one today.
Cool. But let's sort of dive into the game a little bit. So you mentioned 3 factions. It's very similar to the sort of cyberpunk model. Does that how did the 3 factions like affect the game?
Well, I mean, at the moment, because we're still in alpha, choosing the factions really just chooses what your character looks like and which other players you're teaming up with.
Fair.
So we have in-game chat, so you can like message other people in your faction, and then you can meet up with them in certain areas around the map. You can see on the map where your friends are located, so you've got like a little icon, that kind of thing. And then once you team up with other people in your faction, then you can do missions. But you're competing against other factions to complete those missions faster than others.
Okay.
Yeah.
So a little bit like Helldivers.
It is actually quite similar, yeah. I mean,
in a weird way.
it's funny because, we started this project a lot earlier than Helldivers, and Helldivers became super popular, and we noticed a lot of similarities between our game and their game, and I think that, the fact that games like Helldivers, and there's another one that's going viral right now called Only Human. I think is it Only Human?
I can't say I've heard of it.
No, it's a free-to-play open world survival game.
Okay.
With all these kind of crazy monsters and stuff like that, and we watched these kind of gameplay videos, and we realized how similar those games are to what we were building. But we've been building before those games became really, really popular, kind of thing. So I think that we're striking a chord with what people want to play and the kind of games that people want to play. We're mixing that kind of like survival genre with the kind of like extraction shooter type of gameplay, and also the PvP type of gameplay, PvE types of missions, that kind of stuff. So it's not just about shooting other players, it's about teaming up with other players to complete objectives, and in some cases never firing a bullet. You can do missions that are stealth based, reach this checkpoint and steal the loot or hack this computer without alerting any of the NPCs that are on guard in a certain area. And in the future, we plan to also have like convoy missions where you have to transport convoys from point A to point B on the map, or sabotage those convoys that are going from point A to point B on the map. So
Okay, so like sort of lots of different game modes within an open world
exactly
game.
So essentially, what we've been doing for the last 2.5 years since we raised capital is working on all of the kind of the mechanics for an open world sandbox. Like third person character movement, weapon mechanics, vehicle mechanics and physics, the jetpacks, the parkour system, so you can climb over obstacles, so you're not stuck. You can't climb over walls. So we have all that kind of implemented, and now we're implementing all the missions, and that's what we're releasing today and over the next few days. is the first 3 types of mission types that you can do inside the game, and they're kind of dotted all around the map. But as time goes on, we're going to add more and more missions to the game. But yeah, we wanted to basically build. We didn't want to build a game that was just like a team deathmatch game where it's just like 20 people running around shooting each other.
Yeah.
That's actually one of the easiest types of games to make, because there's a lot of templates now you can get on the Unreal Marketplace or the Unity Marketplace that are. It's like all the mechanics are there. They're just kind of plain graphics, just grey box graphics.
Yeah.
And some people will reskin them with just like the basic graphics that they can find, or they use Marketplace assets. But what we've done is we've built everything from scratch in a scalable way, and we've also, like I say, built all the foundations for an open world sandbox, so that then we can have multiple different kind of gameplay modes.
So with taking that approach, would that allow you to sell your own assets on the Unreal Engine store and
I mean, we could.
other platforms?
Yeah, I mean, we could, but the thing is, I don't really know if it's really that much of a revenue generation model for a company of our size, you know? A lot of indie game developers who are really good 3D artists, for example, or they're really good programmers, solo developers, they might not have a job, or they might even have a job at a big company. And for them, selling assets on the marketplace is kind of like a side hustle for them. There has been times where I've thought maybe we could sell our characters or our environment assets, or maybe some gameplay mechanics, maybe some tools or features, whatever. But I don't think that it's really worth it because of how little revenue it would actually bring in.
Yeah. And it's still a like a nascent market that's developing, and interesting. I guess, I mean, that's kind of like in many ways, or in some ways, like a start into Web3, right? Sort of generating your own asset and then having revenue consistently flow, and as a result, right? But
I think that probably a more effective strategy for us in terms of content creation, or having people involved in creating content for Decimated, for example, is UGC, user-generated content, right? So some people think that UGC means, you're basically democratizing all the content creation to your community, so you're basically getting content for free. But that's not how it works, because we have to build all the tools for people to be able to create their own content and import it into the game, right? So whether that's like systems for vehicle customization, character customization, weapon customization, it's not just like, hey, you can customize your weapon and you can put it inside the game, because obviously there's a lot of technical stuff that goes on in the background, right? So we have to develop all of the tools that are user-friendly for people to be able to customize their content and then add that to the marketplace.
But would you not be able to like use some sort of out-of-the-box solution, like, I don't know, some screen capture tool offered by NVIDIA or even by Steam, I think, natively, right? I know for a fact that each time I open any game which has an NVIDIA compatible version or driver, let's say, like installed as part of the game, I get the option to record my gameplay. I believe it happens by default, so but that would be a way to get UGC, right? Because
but that's more content, like gameplay content.
Okay.
What I'm talking about is like users who are able to create vehicles, characters, items of clothing,
that sort of content,
skins,
right,
that kind of stuff.
Right.
Basically, you're providing people. You've got like the gamers, the end users. You give them the tools that they can create their own skins inside the game, especially now, like, think with AI, right? Something that we could potentially do in the future is have a kind of like text box where you can type in what kind of skin you want. I want like a tiger skin weapon, right? You type it in, tiger skin weapon with like gold tips, right? And AI will generate that skin based on the UV of the weapon, and then it will generate the map, and then you can look at it, you can like rotate it around, stuff like that. So we have to build all of that tech to enable user-generated content for the end user, for like the average gamer. But there's a lot of platforms now, third-party SDKs that you can plug into games, like in Unreal Engine 5, where they basically have an SDK that allows really creative and technically minded content creators, like 3D artists, for example, to be able to model their own weapons, model their own vehicles, and then upload them for approval to companies like ours before they get put on the marketplace.
I see.
And, so back to my original statement, which was like, some people think that UGC means that you're kind of like getting away with paying your staff to develop, to create content for the game, and you're just saying, hey guys, you can just create all the content for the game if you want, and we're not going to pay you. just upload it. But it's not like that, because you still have to develop all the tools and the tech for them to be able to do that. And what we build is a platform that gives people the opportunity to then upload their content and then say, okay, let's say there's a certain level of digital scarcity for this weapon. I only want there to be 10 of this weapon that I created, and I'm going to put them on sale for $1,000 worth of the in-game currency each. You could even run like eBay style auctions as well. It's like, okay, we start the bidding at $1,000, but then all the gamers are like itching to get one, and if there's only 10 of them, the price is going to go up and up and up until the bid is over. Hammer slams, and then it's like, okay, how much are they going to sell for like $10,000 each or something like this. So that way, as a platform, you get rev share from the sale of the items, but the content creators, the actual 3D modelers, are the ones that get paid for it. So it's actually like better than having a regular job where they're getting paid a salary at the end of the month. They get paid a salary like $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 a month. Whereas if they create content for a game that's extremely popular, and there's millions of players that are willing to spend, thousands and thousands for individual assets, it could be much more lucrative for these 3D modelers.
That's definitely an interesting model, and I mean, with that in mind, I think people know I'm a let's say like an avid hater of NFTs for very, very many reasons, and I typically say that 95% of NFTs don't have value. But from what I understand, you've created something within that 5%. So tell us a little bit how that works.
I think that, back in 2018, when I first started the project, the vision was to basically have all of the in-game items as NFTs, digitally scarce, provably digitally scarce, so that we could say, and you could see on the blockchain, that there is only 500 of this particular vehicle, for example. But the more that we understand Web3 technology, and the more complex we realize it is to wire it up to a Web2 game, essentially, that's where we pivoted away from having all of the in-game items as NFTs and just going with the traditional centralized back-end system using Microsoft PlayFab. And of course, we can still assign digital scarcity to the items, but of course the users have to trust that we're not going to change or add on more of a certain item on the back end. So if we say there's only 500 of a certain vehicle, we won't change it. We'll say that's what it is, we'll market it as that. But because we still want to deliver on our promises of having a Web3 game with NFTs and with crypto, and so we decided to do what a lot of other people were doing, which was the profile pictures, which have value inside of the game as well as outside of the game. People like to use that as their avatar on Twitter, which also helps to market the product. It gives people access to our elite community, like our premium members channels, and it also has perks inside the game as well, right? So we have various different types of NFTs. We've got the medics, the mechanics, marauders, hackers, mercenaries, and several others. And each of those will give you buffs inside the game. But you could also mix and match them, right? So if you have a medic with a heavy weapon, then you get like one buff for the medic trait, and then one buff for the weapon that you're carrying as well. And what we're doing on the back end is assigning those traits to the buffs inside the game. So people can choose. They can either choose to buy NFTs based on what they look like cosmetically, or how they're named, because we have like a name generator that says like think of Sigourney Weaver, Keanu Reeves.
Yeah.
So we've got Sigourney and Keanu as the first names, and then Reeves as the surname, for example. And then it goes randomly. So some people are like, well, I'm going to buy the Sigourney Weaver because that's the only Sigourney Weaver in the collection, and it's obviously related to aliens, right? So people might buy the NFTs for that reason alone, but other people will want to buy the NFTs because they're like collectible cards, and they have certain perks that are used inside the Decimated game and also our other games as well.
And that's what I think is particularly interesting, right? Like buying an NFT to have like some kind of technical advantage over other players within a game. Now, I mean, gamers are traditionally against the sort of pay-to-win model, but there are certain games in which that thrives. Like Diablo, I think, is a perfect example. Right, like Diablo 3 marketplace just made news for so many reasons over and over and over again. So, and I think that's also not a bad thing because it can how do I say this without being mean to children? um, Lead to an environment that's potentially less toxic, right? Because if kids can't play, then you're gonna have a little less, teen rage in game chats, which is probably my biggest complaint of almost any online game, right? There's the rage levels and the toxicity levels, because there's so many frustrated kids and teens around playing games at the end of the day, which is what we were at one point in life, admittedly. But that could be like an interesting value proposition for an older gamer. I also think that, and I haven't played the game yet, but it seems from the outside at least, and from the materials which you've created so far, it almost seems like you're trying to bring back the most enjoyable things of a couch co-op, but still doing it remotely. What do I mean, right? So, like, the best things about the couch co-op which is one of the reasons why I think Helldivers 2 was so successful, right? Like, it had that PVE element that was extremely reliant on the entire party working together efficiently, right? If one guy's struggling, chances are you're going to kill the party. Secondly, we like way back when, the one of the biggest impacts that couch co-ops had was achievements. Now, there wasn't really achievement system back then, but you could still say, get EP, I guess, for saying I've done this and I've done this, etc. And I guess using NFTs is a way to sort of take that to the next level. Like, what do you think about that?
Well, I mean, in our case, the NFT side of things is kind of like optional. You don't need to have one. It is kind of cosmetic, but at the same time, it does have some in-game perks. But that's not going to make the game pay to win, where somebody who's bought an NFT will have a distinctly better advantage over you as a non-NFT holder, because it's still a skill-based game. You still have limited inventory space. You still have to work with other teammates and share your resources. Like, I'm running out of ammo clips. I'll, give me a bottle of water, and let's trade a bottle of water for an ammo clip, for example, that kind of stuff. So, I think that we always try and find balance in the game to not make it pay to win. We don't want it to be pay to win whatsoever, So
that's going to be difficult though, because if by definition you will, unless you say, listen, the buffs in the NFTs are going to be super minimal, right? Like almost purely aesthetic.
Yeah.
Right? Then you can get away with it, absolutely. But as soon as that buff does something that cannot be found on an item which you can pick up off the floor, or a boss, or a raid, or whatever, by, let's call it the internet's definition, right? It's pay to win.
Yeah.
That being said, I think it creates a more interesting problem, which is, and this is, I guess, one of the sort of challenges of pioneering, right? Which is, let's say you create an item that's imba. At some point, it's going to be, right, imbalanced. It's going to be at some point, right? How do you maintain? Let's say, okay, you can limit it to say there will only be one, right? And that will, of course, limit the impact. But I think it's going to create some very unique dynamics, which you are going to be one of the first people to try and solve. Is what I'm trying to say.
I mean, I don't think that we are one of the first people that are trying to solve it,
Why?
Because there's obviously a lot of other games that also have in-game items with different stats. I mean, in our case, like the weapons with different rates of refire, different levels of recoil.
But they can buff and nerf, and you can't.
That's true. Well, I mean, we can, because like I say, we're still using a centralized backend.
Okay.
But of course, you have to listen to the community and then what they think is fair, right? And I know that, and there are some other games where gamers will respond very negatively to the fact that like a certain item has been nerfed, for example. It doesn't have as much damage as it used to have, for example. So yeah, we have to tread carefully when we're making changes to things. But that's another reason why we decided not to make all the in-game items NFTs. For two reasons. One, because we want to be able to change the data in the future as the game evolves. And two, because we don't really need any of those in-game items to leave the ecosystem and be sold in the secondary market. All we're doing is just distributing people away from our game rather than towards it, you know?
Yeah.
So that's why we're like, okay, well, let's just do the profile pictures, but let's give them utility. Let's give them a purpose, not just inside Decimated, but also in other games as well that we're going to develop. We've actually started our second game, our mobile game already. So yeah.
Okay, and talk to me about the mobile game. What's the rationale behind that?
So you remember Smash TV?
Recall, it seems to ring a bell,
Okay,
but
so
educate me.
Super Nintendo game.
Okay.
I mean, it was also on the Mega Drive and other consoles as well.
Okay.
Super Nintendo game though, top-down roguelike shooter, arena shooter.
Mm-hmm.
So you're basically going through all these different rooms, and you have all these NPCs that are running towards you, and it's kind of, it's like a televised deathmatch arena.
Okay.
Right? So again, it's inspired by the Running Man or Battle Royale type of things. You know, it's like people are watching it on TV. They're watching the contestants like trying to get. They're being bombarded with all these enemies, and they're picking up prizes. They're picking up money, that kind of stuff. You know, it's like, and the guy's like, "I'd buy that for $1," and big money, big prizes. And it's like it was a two-player co-op
You're
game.
good at that.
Yeah, two-player co-op game of you going through these arenas, these dungeons that were kind of like futuristic cyberpunk type of rooms. And then at the end of every level, there was like, I think there was 4 main levels in Smash TV. At the end of, there was like a boss that you always thought you'd killed it, and then it would like suddenly come back to life, but it would just like be showing its rib cage. And then it would like, you know, start shooting lasers from its eyes, and you've got to like avoid the things and picking up power-ups and switching weapons, whilst there's NPCs also coming from the walls and that kind of stuff, you know. So
it sounds like Metal Slug, but like a different perspective.
there's a lot of games now that are like this kind of top-down roguelike shooters, you know. So I said I want to make a game that's just like that, but adding in the survival element, you know. So it's not just a top-down shooter, but it's also collecting resources and repairing vehicles and then driving around, maybe with a vehicle with a turret gun, because these roguelikes are typically just you and your companion, or you and another player, going around shooting NPCs and then getting rewarded for shooting the NPCs and then having a big boss fight at the end of the dungeon, right? So I wanted to do that, but also have inspiration from the likes of Cannon Fodder. Remember Cannon Fodder?
No.
Again, from the 90s? Top-down, pixel art, kind of like... it was a game with like you control a small group of soldiers.
Mm-hmm.
You would have like 4 or 5 soldiers in a squad, and your mission was basically to explore the map, shoot NPC enemies at various points of the map, like hiding behind trees or like dug in, that kind of stuff, you know. And then eventually your quest would be to go to this waypoint and then destroy some buildings, and then you get rewarded. So that was more like level based. But it was also a big inspiration on our top-down shooter. So we've got an external company, that are working on the prototype for this top-down shooter, but with the survival elements. There's also other games that we took inspiration from, like Mini DayZ. So it's like DayZ, but it's for mobile, pixel art style, again, top-down. There's another game called Zero Seavert, which is another kind of like nuclear apocalypse type of survival game where you start off with nothing. You've got to go and find some food. You've got to find some water. You've got to. You can maybe drink irradiated water, for example. Then you get sick, for example. So I was like, we want to take the complexity from the survival game genre, and mix it in with the top-down shooter roguelike genre. Right? That's what we want to do, because that's kind of what Decimated would be if it was like a pixel art mobile game. So we're like, okay, let's just make like a Decimated light version, Decimated retro version. You know?
And interestingly, you can. I mean, arguably, it's 10 times easier to sell a mobile game than to sell a Steam game, just because the TAM is a million times bigger. And I guess it could work as a really interesting funnel, right? Then to sort of
exactly, and that's
feed
the thing.
The PC gamers.
Yeah, I wanted to like open up a new audience, a new user base in the mobile market, but still provide utility for the tokens and the NFTs, so that we have interoperability with our own assets between our games.
Okay, so you'll be able to, let's say, like, earn NFTs from this mobile game, or you'll be able to buy NFTs and use them within the mobile game.
Exactly, the latter. So, yeah, it's like if people who've bought NFTs previously from Magic Eden and they've used them in Decimated, that would be your avatar inside the mobile game as well.
Okay.
So if you bought a medic, then you would look like a medic inside the game.
Cool.
Obviously, because we have like 5,000 NFTs, we're not going to create 5,000 characters inside the game. So we're designing the characters in a way that you can still tell that they look like your character, but just from color variations, for example, and slight, a helmet variation, for example. So yeah, that's what we're doing. Is basically one, to access the user base on mobile, especially in Southeast Asia, for example. We get approached all the time by gaming guilds that are in Southeast Asia, and the first question we ask is, does your guild have high-end gaming rigs? And like, no, most of our guild are mostly mobile gamers. They play like Axie Infinity and Candy
there's
Crush
guilds for mobile gamers.
Yeah.
What has the world come to?
Yeah. So that's another reason. It's like we're turning people away because they don't have the hardware required to play a game like Decimated. So we're like, well, we want to access all these people who want to come and play our games. So it's a no-brainer for us to have like a mobile accessory companion app that goes along with the Decimated game. I mean, it's always been my vision. And the thing is, it's funny because like back in 2018, 2019, where I was pitching my vision to investors and publishers, I don't just want to make one game. I want to make a franchise of games for PC, console, and mobile. They'd be like, "Oh, it's too ambitious. It's like impossible. You'll never do it. We're not going to invest because, you're trying to, you're trying to do too much." But I was like, "Well, I'm not going to do it all at once. We'll do it in stages. That's my vision. You asked me what my vision is. That's my vision.
Exactly.
To be a developer and publisher of games across multiple platforms. And now we're at a position where we have the resources and the capital to be able to work on Decimated internally, but also hire external partners who specialize in top-down shooters for mobile to make one for us in the style of Decimated.
Exactly. So the vision is becoming self-fulfilling, which I'm glad to see.
Yeah.
Last few questions, I guess. Talk to me a little bit about the choice of blockchain. Which chain did you choose and why?
Well, I mean, in the early days, as you might remember, 2018, 2019, I was using Ethereum, Unreal Engine 4. We had Ethereum plugged into Unreal Engine 4 with a plugin from the marketplace called EtherLinker. And we had a team deathmatch mode that we called Kill for Crypto, where we had this circular arena with multiple levels. People could jump up and down, that kind of stuff. And anytime you got a kill, you get one token from the other player. But it was very slow and expensive on Ethereum back then. And so we were like, well, maybe we should just have leaderboards at the end and then just do the reconciliation of who the winners and losers were at the end. So it's almost like a zero-sum game where you spend 10 tokens, or let's say, 10 tokens each to play in the game. That's 10 lives. And you basically fight until you're completely eliminated, and whoever won basically gets the tokens at the end, right? It's like time-based as well. It's like 10-minute sessions. But even having leaderboards at the end, we realized that was also going to be kind of slow and expensive, certainly on Ethereum. And around 2020 to 2021, I took a break from the blockchain development side because I thought that it was slow and expensive, and also I was getting so much backlash from traditional investors and publishers because they weren't interested in Web3 games, they weren't interested in blockchain games, they weren't interested in cryptocurrency in games or NFTs in games or anything like that, right? So we were super early. And then meanwhile, in the crypto space, nobody was interested in gaming because they were just more interested in sophisticated uses for blockchain technology like supply chain or DeFi, decentralized finance, that kind of stuff. Games were for kids, and people even said this. I remember I went to a blockchain conference in Switzerland, and I just felt like the geekiest person in the room, in a room full of bankers all trying to get into crypto. And then there's me. It's like, what do you do? I'm like, I'm a game developer, and they're like, oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah.
They didn't take me seriously.
Exactly. And what's hilarious is we were probably in this way before they even knew what Bitcoin was, right? This is hilarious. So, and from my perspective, I kind of thought that it was the perfect fit to have Web3 tech in games, And then, of course, 2021,
I put the game on Steam around 2020 without any of the blockchain integration, and I was kind of sitting on the fence about even using Web3 or not. So I was trying to get the interest from like Tencent and Sega, Jagex, Gamigo, all these like Perfect World Entertainment, all these big publishers that were in my network who I've been networking with for years in my career. And they were like, we're not interested because you're a blockchain game. Well, we don't have to be a blockchain game. We could just be a game. And, we're kind of not sure if we're going to use it or not, but still there was resistance from those guys because of our association with blockchain
Of course.
previously. But then, stroke of luck, at the end of 2021, around the time, I'd already given up on the project, to be honest. I thought, like, nobody's interested in the project. We have a negligible player base, and I've spent a lot of money on the project, and it's not really taking off, so I'll just release the game as an indie game, see what happens. Maybe if we get some players, then investors and publishers might be interested. But late 2021 was when everybody from the blockchain industry was suddenly interested in Web3 games. And they invested tens of millions into Star Atlas, tens of millions into Illuvium, and they were all trying to bank or bet on the next big winner that was going to exceed Axie Infinity levels or reach that same level of unicorn status, for example,
Yeah.
But because I'd been building a prototype for so long and had a game up on Steam and a provable MVP that people could play, that's when the investors were interested. But they were the first thing they asked me was, "Are you still making a blockchain game?" And I was like, "I'm not sure. I originally set out to do that, but nobody's interested in using blockchain in games. So it looks like I'm just going to release the game without any blockchain tech and just release a demo." And they were like, "Well, if you pivot back to blockchain, then we'll all invest in your project today." So, and I was like, obviously so jaded by being led on by investors saying that they were going to invest, and then 6 months later they're like, "Oh, we decided not to invest. It's too high risk, or we're not interested in this, we're not interested in that, or your team is too scrappy, or they're all distributed remotely." All these excuses,
Yeah.
So yeah, we went from having straight rejections for years to being offered $34 million from 180 investors at the end of 2021. And at that moment, that's when we decided to switch to Solana, because we evaluated all the different chains. And in fact, Polygon were one of our investors, and we told them, we appreciate the capital, but there's no guarantee that we're going to use Polygon because it's an EVM chain, and we've already used Ethereum in the past, and we're not really sure if it will be scalable. We're kind of looking for something that's maybe faster and cheaper, and maybe the next big thing, Polygon was already starting to maybe lose a little bit of, not credibility, but it had been around for a while. Maybe people were looking for the next best thing, and we were as well. So we evaluated a bunch of chains, and then we decided to go with Solana because it was like super cheap for the transactions, super fast for the transactions. And yes, okay, I know that Solana has some problems with some outages sometimes because it's not a fully decentralized chain, but it does the job. And like I say, because we're not building a game that's on chain that requires the blockchain for every single aspect of the game to run, it's a manual process, just like sending tokens from one wallet to another, or sending an NFT from your private wallet to your game wallet. If it doesn't work, you wait for 10 minutes and you try again, and it's got nothing to do with us. It's the chain. Maybe the chain has got a bit of congestion from one day to the next.
It's an absolutely perfect solution. I think a lot of people give Solana a lot of
Flack.
a lot of flack, yeah, right? Because it's you can DDoS Solana with 2 Bitcoin worth of transactions, sure, but people forget that blockchains have different purposes and they're good for different things, right? Like if you look at the like you said, it's not the most decentralized blockchain out there, and it's not the most secure blockchain out there, but it is probably the most scalable blockchain out there, and it is one of, if not the cheapest blockchain out there, right? Like transaction price is 0.00005 cents.
Yeah, it's like nothing.
Fixed fee.
Exactly.
It's like, what other chain can do that,
Exactly.
right? Like, do you have the same levels of security as ETH? No. Do you have the same levels of update integrity as BTC? No. But then, you can run 70,000 transactions a second.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We have had problems with it in the past. In the early days, after we raised capital and we were having to do manual distribution to our pre-sale buyers, so we had 46 investors we brought on board. and then an additional 110 influencers or KOLs. So you're talking about 150, 160 people that we had to distribute their tokens to on a weekly basis. And so we were using a Solana multi-sender for that. But there was no way to verify that the transactions had gone through. You know, you would either, I mean, you'd use the multi-sender, and then it would say that, you know, 25% of them had failed and 75% of them had gone through. But you'd be like, well, which ones failed? And then you've got to go through manually. And so we ended up having people contacting us being like, hey, we didn't receive our allocation yesterday. And you have to go and check, and it was such a nightmare to do.
That's quite...
So what we did was we set up a claim portal to make it easy for them to go and claim, just connect their wallet up and then claim their tokens. And if there was a failed transaction, then they just retry 5 minutes later. Because for us to send those transactions out on a weekly basis,
of course,
it was a real hassle when the transactions were failed, because then we had to go back and then fix everything. It got to the stage, like after 6 months, we actually paused distribution of the tokens to the investors just for a few weeks because of all the problems with sending on Solana, like not knowing which transactions failed, and especially when we're sending, like, say, 150, 160 at once in one transaction, so it's like a multi-sender. I mean, I tried various different strategies, like breaking it up into 10 transactions.
Interesting.
But then I was doing like 15, like I'd have to do like 15 separate Solana transactions, but still 2 out of 10 would fail. And I'm like, what the fuck?
You weren't using your own node, I imagine. You were using someone else's node.
We used what was it called? Sol Minter, I think it was called. I can't remember what it was called. But yeah, they have their own RPC system in the back end. Triton is the most common one on Solana.
Okay. And you can like rent their node to publish transactions on mainnet.
No, it's just a UI. You connect up your wallet,
okay,
and then you pay them a fee for sending to multiple wallets at once, and you just copy and paste in a CSV file with like the wallet, comma, the amount of tokens. That's it.
Yeah.
Like you get in multi-senders on Ethereum, and I'm sure the multi-senders on Ethereum are also problematic. So like I say, that's why we set up our own infrastructure for that.
Interesting. I mean, it's I think like in that case specifically, the like if you constantly relying on a third party node to be able to commit those transactions to the chain. So it's very difficult to say whether the root cause of the problem was the main net itself or priority access to that node, right? The downside is creating a Solana node requires like the hardware requirements are ridiculous. It's like, I don't know, I think it's 256 gigs of RAM. That's just the RAM you need to be able to run the node, right? Last I costed it out a couple of years back, it was just a bit over 120K, something like that. But I guess that could also allude to, you know, why there's so much hate around the Solana ecosystem. Now things are finally changing for the wrong reasons, albeit, but you know, because the meme coin hype is based on Solana, etc. Yeah. So people are a little bit more open to it. But yeah, I think Solana has a fantastic future, absolutely, and Decimated as well. So I look forward to having you back here. I don't know, in another year or so, and we'll see what happens.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for your time, Stephen.
Cheers.
Cheers, man.
Thanks.